right?
Because I don't know if that's the best slogan right now. Is someone has been touching all of your whiskey?
Would you rather have one person touch it though, or like 50 people touch it? I'd rather have that one person.
I would rather have one person touch. What's up, guys, and welcome back to take 2 of the Whiskey Uncut podcast.
Florida storms, right?
Yeah, so we're going to give it another shot. It is storming outside. If the power gets cut out halfway through again, we may just have to miss
just
this
call
week.
Just call it a day.
Call it a day.
Yeah.
And go back and just do this episode later this week when there's not a lightning storm outside. So I'm Paul, your host, and this is James from Bourbon Sippers. And today we're doing Koval. They're our first brand sponsor for an episode. So they sent us these samples that won't influence our opinion because we didn't tell them like, hey, we're going to give you a positive review. But, you know, we're typically not going to reach out to somebody that we don't enjoy their product, you know, like, so.
Yeah, or at least we're not going to reach out to folks that don't have, you know, don't have interesting products. And that's, right. I think that's what really stood out with Koval for me. So, when I went to the distillery in like 2013 or 2014, I got the full tour and I talked to everybody, and I just came away really impressed with their approach to making whiskey. And, you know, set aside the products themselves and what you think of the products, just the way they approach it is really cool. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, the distillery opened up in 2008. And at the time, it was the first distillery back in Chicago since the mid-1800s. So
wow.
They had to, my understanding was that they sort of had to completely get the prohibition laws rewritten so they could come back in and set up a distillery in Chicago.
Yeah.
And they really focused on this idea of grain to bottle, meaning they go out and they pick the grain, they pick the barrel. At the time, they told me that one person touched the grain, touched the wood, made the whiskey, bottled it. Like, so literally one person touched it from beginning to end, which I thought was super, super cool. Whether or not that was like a marketing play or not, I totally bought it.
Did
like,
they wash their hands?
I hope so, especially now with COVID. I hope they're washing their hands, right?
Because I don't know if that's the best slogan right now is someone has been touching all of your whiskey.
Would you rather have one person touch it though, or like 50 people touch it? I'd rather have that one person.
I would rather have one person touch.
And then they also embrace this really cool idea that just everything they release is a single barrel. And so
I like that.
Yeah, you know, we've tried a bunch of different things on here before, and they, you know, we always compare the standard release to their single barrel. Well, with Koval, their standard release are their single barrels, and I think that's a really cool concept. The other thing is they take a lot of pride in the way they distill their products. And so we haven't really talked a whole lot about the distillation process on here. I'm not going to get into it too much because it's super nerdy, but the first part that comes off the still is called the heads. And the heads are really super harsh. If you guys ever go to a distillery, they'll usually take you through and they'll show you, they'll let you smell the heads. It smells like fingernail polish remover. It's where a lot of the methanol is, the things that make you go blind. It's bad news. So you want to keep that out, typically, or the majority of it out of your final product. And then the tails, to me, are kind of fruity, and they smell like wet paper.
Yeah, so like if you were to look at the shape of a still, and we can go into this more in a future episode, but the shape of like the neck of a still and the size of a still play a big influence in how that flavor gets imparted, because the heads are usually, they're the lightest vapors because that's what comes off first.
It's what evaporates first.
Right.
Yeah.
And so those are the lightest, the pure, like you said, methanol. And depending on the size and shape of your still changes how long that run of heads is versus the hearts and the tails. And so is this being done in a column still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's less important.
Or at least I think so. I'd have to look, but I'm pretty sure.
Versus a pot still with scotch. So the shape of the still can influence that as well. But you're right that the heads are those light, dangerous parts. And then the tails start getting some really cool, oily, thicker, fruity flavors, but they can get really astringent.
You get some of those fusel oils that really give it kind of like a almost like a gasoline type of
Yeah,
smell when it's
exactly.
really heavy. But the idea is that if you blend a little bit of the head and tail in, you can get some really interesting flavor combinations and some complexity. So most places do that, whether they kind of redistill them or they blend a little bit in. Koval takes all of that out. So
Just,
when you
just hearts.
so yep, when you drink their product, it's just 100% hearts. So when you combine this very transparent grain to bottle with a single barrel product with just the heart cut, you get just it's a really cool approach, and it's one that I hadn't seen at the time when I went to visit the distillery. And so I knew as soon as we started this, these were one of the first people that I was going to get a hold of.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to do this lineup because I had not tried Koval until recently. We were looking at doing a single barrel pick, and I think we had already done a pick with them with jigs.
Yeah, and I brought that one with us today. We have
The
a
Rye
barrel.
Den.
Yeah, the Rye-Den. It's a cast strength, like 6-7 year rye from them.
And so I've gotten to try a few samples of the rye and the bourbon, but I had not gotten to try the 4 grain that we have here. And it's all single barrels, so technically I haven't tried the bourbon or the rye either.
That's true. And I haven't tried any of these since I went to the distillery, besides the cast strength, recently that we tried of the bourbon and the rye, but I haven't tried their standard releases in 7-8 years. So for me, this is kind of a return to Koval a little bit.
Yeah.
And I should say too, if you are interested in organic products, all the Koval products are USDA certified organic, and they're also kosher. Paul and I talked. We have no idea what it means to be kosher, I don't think, or how you go about being a kosher whiskey. But Buffalo Trace just came out with their kosher line. It got a lot of pub, and the first thing I thought of when I saw that was, well, there's already kosher products out there, and Koval being one of them.
Yeah, so again, we have no idea what that means, but for the people that it matters to, that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And your choices are limited. Even if
Yeah.
you look at just organic whiskeys, if that's what you're into and that's what you want, your choices are pretty limited.
Yep.
And I think
Bruichladdich
this is a
makes
good chance to
some.
do that.
So if you're a Scotch drinker, Bruichladdich has some organic whiskeys, but again, it's a limited selection because there's not that many of producers of the grains that they need at the scale that they need and of the right varietal, all that stuff that plays into making the whiskey. You can't just pick any piece of corn and make whiskey from it. Just because it's organic doesn't mean it's going to make good whiskey. So it really limits their selection, but I really hope that as more distilleries do this, it becomes more prevalent because let's be honest, like if smoky Scotch, right, if they smoke the barley to dry it and those smoke particles stay through the distillation process into the liquid that you drink, what do you think, like pesticides and like all that, like there's stuff getting in your whiskey, that if it's not organic is potentially influencing flavor or, whatever that, or even just general health,
Yeah, and I only play a scientist at the University of Florida. Like I don't really.
Yeah.
I'm a scientist, but
that was science.
this
for
was
you.
science. Yeah, but I'm not that kind of a scientist. So I would love to talk to somebody about.
I thought you were though. Aren't you like literally that kind of scientist with like plants and food and stuff? That's like actually the kind of scientist.
But
you
I
are.
mean, to understand whether or not it makes it through the still, you would need an organic chemist, and that's not.
Yeah,
that's
but
not what I am.
I'm gonna do the back of the napkin thing and say that if smoke makes it through the still,
It's probably true. Yeah.
pesticides and stuff, and other,
And it's certainly something that I've thought more
including
of.
what was ever on that guy's hands who touched everything.
Who touched all of it.
just
all of
touched
it.
all.
But I mean, we go to, I really make an effort to buy organic produce now. And so, yeah, I mean, if this is something that's important to you, like there's not too many choices out there. And I think this is a really
But Koval has
interesting one.
3.
They do. Yeah, and I think all of their stuff, whether it's
Or at
they
least
also do gins, they do liqueurs.
Oh, okay.
Their liqueurs are outstanding. They have a a ginger liqueur that just blew my mind the first time I had it. It's amazing, and
We'll have to
all
get
of
some
it's
of that.
organic. Yeah,
All right, so first one, the bourbon, is 47% ABV, and distilled from 100% grains.
It is. It says 100% grains on the bottle.
So,
And we have mini bottles, right? These are 200 milliliter bottles.
Right. So there's not enough room on the label, as discussed in the previous episode.
Before the lightning strike and before we went off air, I guess.
And we're accounting for the small bottle flavor here in our tasting notes.
We are
in our judgment. So we're not holding these to the same standard as big bottle flavor, obviously. But yeah, 100% grains. What does that mean, James?
Yeah. So the one thing that people are going to miss in the redo is that I try to get you to guess the second grain in this, and I knew
it took me all of 2 seconds because my palate is absolutely incredible.
You don't even know what the grain is. That's what, and I sort of set you up for failure.
Mullet or something, right?
Millet.
Oh,
mullet is a fish. Okay. You don't want a fish to be your second grain in a whiskey.
Hey, no one's done it yet.
That's true.
So you don't know.
That's true.
If people are putting sheep poop from Norway
as their
in their
smoking
whiskey,
influence, we can put mullet in it.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, but what's super interesting about this bourbon is, to legally be a bourbon, it has to be 51% corn. But the vast majority of your bourbons are 70% corn plus, right?
Right. With about 20 to 30% rye and then 5 to 10% barley.
Yeah, and 20 to 30% rye would be kind of a high rye mash bill. But here we have 51% corn. So right at the border of what you can legally call a bourbon. And then there's one other grain, and it's 49% millet. And they have a 100% millet whiskey that I would love to try because I haven't had enough millet in whiskey products to know what it brings to this, but I know what it doesn't bring. It doesn't bring the spiciness of the rye. You don't pick up that. You pick up a little bit of the funky note that you might typically get with a wheated bourbon, and I'm assuming that's the millet.
Yeah.
But this is a really unique profile for a bourbon.
Yeah, so again, don't really know what millet tastes like on its own, but I would say the nose, the palate on this right up front is like honey and a little bit sweet, and that millet is clearly pulling back the corn because most whiskeys this age, most bourbons, I should say, this age, taste really corn heavy because there hasn't been a lot of time for the cask influence to be there, or if it's a high rye or a rye whiskey, they taste like the grain is very forward. So having that, dialing back that corn to the minimum, which is oddly unusual. I've always wondered why there aren't more whiskeys that play around with that other 49%.
I think there's more smaller distilleries now that are working with it.
Yeah.
I think we just tried.
But I mean, like,
it was Old Elk or something.
For a long
I think
time,
too, was like that,
all the
51%.
big brands, they all pretty much cookie cutter in terms of their mash bills. But this is really interesting because that millet clearly dials back the corn sweetness. So it leaves you with like this little bit of honey up front. It gives you, I think you called it nuttiness.
There's a little bit of a nuttiness to it to me, and I think the thing that jumps out the most is vanilla. I get vanilla on it. But then there's this kind of almost peanutty note in the back to me that sort of lingers on your palate a little bit.
And I could definitely see like a little bit of like peanut shell, like the dust, the end of the bag kind of thing. But for me, like it's a little tricky to discern the difference between that and just like the oak being there. And so like I got a little more of just like the toasted barrel note.
Yeah, and these are. So Paul mentioned that these are younger. These are probably, my guess is about 4 years. I don't think they give a true age statement on them. When I went to visit in 2013, 2014, they were younger. I think they were in the 2-year range. The other kind of oddity with these whiskeys is they're aged in 30-gallon barrels. So they're not your standard 55-gallon barrels that you see. They're 30.
Oh.
But I will say this.
Wait, is that so? A quarter cask is.
Oh, now you're going to get into Scotch notes, and I'm not going to know.
Man, now I don't know how big is a quarter. I think a quarter cask is slightly smaller than that. Because it's not by volume. I think it's a quarter. I'd have to look it up. I can't remember anymore.
I mean,
There's too many different sizes of barrels, but the important thing is it is a smaller barrel.
Right. In terms of American whiskeys, your standard is your 55, 53, 55. And then you do have a lot of smaller distilleries that age in smaller barrels, but they're typically 5, 10, 20. I haven't seen too many that age in 30. I do not get the small barrel funk from this that I normally do from like a 20-gallon barrel or a 10-gallon barrel.
That's because small barrels and small bottles have
it offsets.
They have opposite effects on a whiskey.
I didn't even think of that. We
So-
offset the barrel size with the bottle size.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's the problem.
Where have you been all my life?
People have been
Paul?
doing it wrong. For you distillers out there, the secret, if you want to use small barrels, is you have to put the whiskey in small bottles.
Oh, exactly.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it just tastes wrong. If you
You-
put a
you-
small barrel whiskey in a big bottle, it's obviously not going to taste
It's
right.
just misfit. You just changed the whole whiskey industry. On this,
Revolutionary.
on this podcast.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you're full of crap, but for the most part, like I don't taste small barrel in this, and I'm really, really sensitive to small barrel. That's why the vast majority of the time when I go to small craft distilleries, I don't like their products because you get this kind of chemical, artificial note that comes out of this much quicker aging
Yeah.
process. It doesn't have time to mellow out. So
And-
I don't know whether
And I'll just say, for those who don't know what we're talking about, a good thing to do, as much as I hate to support it, go on Amazon, buy the like $5 wood chips for quick aging whiskey. Make your whiskey 10 years old overnight. Go buy those and stick those in a really young whiskey, and then tell me how it tastes.
it's going to be dark, really young whiskey.
Right, and,
That's
and
the
it's
only
going to
difference.
taste like wood.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
but there's so much more when a whiskey ages than just oak flavor. The way the oak breathes and contracts with seasons, the way the whiskey goes in and out, all of that plays a factor in creating all these other flavors that is not just wood touching whiskey.
Right.
And so that's the problem with those young barrels aging fast, is it gets some components of that, but not all of it. So
Yeah, and I don't know what I fully expected when I tried these. Once I read 30-gallon, I fully expected to pick up that note of small barrel aging. I don't get it. I don't know if it's because the unique mash bills. I don't know if it's because they use only the heart cut, and so the whiskey that is interacting with the wood is interacting differently than it is at other places. Or if there's just some sort of magical cutoff, right? Where once you get above a certain surface
Well-
area to volume ratio, so maybe once you get to 30,
Well,
it's
also,
not as big
the
of a problem.
climate in Chicago is probably, I mean, I don't know, but climate plays a big difference. too,
It does,
in,
yeah.
in how whiskey ages. And so, you know, if you're sticking a small barrel whiskey in Texas where it's really hot, it's just going to
It's a bad idea.
Probably going to make that effect super dramatic.
Yeah, we have ones here in Florida that use 5 and 10-gallon barrels, and it's not a good idea.
I think
Like,
I know who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
Florida is not a place where you want to age whiskey anyway. But my take-home point is that if you're scared of the small barrel note, you're not going to get it in this product. You could pour this to me. I've had a ton of this kind of whiskey. I would never guess that this was aged in a small barrel.
I really like the nose on this one.
It's a really good product.
The finish isn't quite there for me, as it usually never is with younger whiskeys.
And it's at 94 proof.
Right, and it's lower proof, but it's not a harsh finish at all. It's just the honey, slight oak. I mean, it's very slightly dry, but it's just short. But I would drink this all day,
Yeah, I agree. Now,
especially summertime. This is a perfect like summertime bourbon.
yeah, I would agree. It's very light on your palate. I love the vanilla aspect to it. The official tasting notes that we got from Koval on this were, they say vanilla on the palate, so we're right on that. And then peppery caramel finish. I don't know that I get a ton of that. And then they say mango chutney. I don't even know if I would know what mango chutney tasted like if you like spoon-fed mango chutney to me. There's maybe a little bit of a peachiness to it that I get, but I don't know that I get mango chutney.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit of an esoteric tasting note. Like, that's so specific to like mango chutney. I've probably had mango chutney once in my life.
It's like the people who say marzipan, and I'm like, you don't even know what marzipan tastes like.
Or
Just say
opulent.
almond.
Opulent.
Opulent. I forgot about
Yeah.
opulent. Would you describe this as opulent?
No, but one of these I would.
Oh yeah. All right.
Spoiler alert, since we just ruined it by doing take two. I've lied by saying that I haven't tasted these before because I just tasted them 5 minutes ago.
That's true. That's true. But we can't do anything about lightning strikes.
yeah.
So we're rolling with the punches here in Florida.
That's true. So what's the price on this for the full bottle? I don't know if you could probably buy the small bottles. Maybe at the distillery.
I think you can. Yeah, you can buy them as gift packs. I think at the distillery, so you can buy their whole standard lineup as a gift pack. But $7.50s if you find these around. I was doing a little bit of digging around on the internet. Anywhere from $50 to $60. I think mean is probably 50 to 55.
Sounds fair to me.
Yeah. And again, you're dealing with it's younger, but you're dealing with an organic product. Mm-hmm. It's extremely unique. I guarantee you could pour this for somebody and they're not going to know what it is. And yeah, single barrel.
Are the bigger bottles bottled at the same ABV? Or are they
yes.
cast strength?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you get a store pick, you can get it cast strength. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And the ones we were trying through jigs here in town were cast strength. I can't remember. I think they were 114, 117 proof range. Yeah. And it did make a difference. I'll say if you see one of these hanging around as a store pick somewhere, I wouldn't even hesitate. Mm-hmm. Like I would just grab it because the ones we tried were really good and they were noticeably, I think, more complex and definitely more oily on your palate than what these are.
I think of the 8 samples we had, there was only one that I would have been like, it was questionable.
It was and it was off.
Yeah, like there was one that was a good bit different, and I was like, I don't know if I would buy that one, but 7 out of 8 of them, I would.
Yeah,
so
and it wasn't like
I would definitely recommend. So.
And it wasn't like it was a bad whiskey. It just was off profile compared to the rest of the ones that we were trying, and it just didn't really resonate with me. I prefer the rye when we tried them at cast strength, but I'm kind of a sucker for rye. I think you prefer the bourbon, correct?
Yeah. I prefer the bourbon a little bit. So moving on to the next one, we have, and speaking of bourbon, last night I went to a wedding, James. They were serving bourbon.
Nice. And that's my kind of wedding. That's good.
Open bar.
Yeah.
I may have had too much bourbon.
Oh.
But here's the thing about bourbon, James. You can never have enough. So,
is that what it is?
So
I bet you had enough. I bet technically speaking, you probably had enough.
I would probably, if you watch their wedding video and see the way I was dancing, you could probably make the argument that I had enough. But that's the great thing about whiskey, as Mark Twain said. You can have too much of anything, except too much whiskey is never enough. So
yeah. I want to see this wedding video.
Yeah,
can we put clips of the wedding video on YouTube?
That'd be funny.
Yeah.
So kudos to the people serving, and I was glad they had a good selection. I was surprised they had Jack Daniels, they had Makers, they had Knob Creek, 9-year. What else did they have? Basil Hayden's, I think. So,
that's decent.
Yeah, for
stuff you can drink neat.
Yeah,
as well as if you want it in a cocktail.
For serving to that large number of people, I was surprised.
I want to have a bourbon fountain. If I ever get married, I'm going to have a bourbon fountain.
Well, I told you I showed you what I had at my wedding, right? I had Maker's Mark, Cast Strength, Prohibition 1920, Bowmore 25.
Now we're talking. Yeah, that's a good wedding.
Glenfarclas 25, like Highland Park 12. I had a wall of whiskey at my wedding.
Yeah. I want a fountain in the middle where people can just come up and like dip a Glencairn in.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And of course, being me, it's just going to be George T. Stagg. Like that's it.
Well,
it's going to be a George T. Stagg fountain.
I think we're going to need a lot more Patreon supporters if you want a fountain of George T. Stagg.
We're going to need a lot, yeah. All right, so the second one up here, this is their 4-grain. And I distinctly remember when I went to the distillery that this was by far my favorite.
This smells incredible.
The nose on this is just
and it's off the
insane.
wall.
And I think the reason I liked it at the time was because it has kind of a minty nose up front, and I liked rye. Mm-hmm. But I say now the reason I like it is because I don't know that I've ever had anything that tastes like this or that smells like this. So a little bit of background on this guy. This is again at 94 proof. But so we mentioned the bourbon was 51% corn, 49% millet. So no rye, no wheat, which is definitely uncommon. Here we have a 4-grain whiskey that's oat, malted barley, rye, and wheat. So no corn. So we have a bourbon that's no rye, no wheat, and we have a 4-grain whiskey that has no corn in it.
Yeah. And, I said this before, but like if you were to just type that up or just tell somebody that, but without them having tried the whiskeys, I think a lot of people would assume that it was just pure gimmick. Like,
yeah, they're just trying to be unique.
We're just trying to stand out and have anything we can to market of like, we have a bourbon with these wild, unconventional mash bills. But the thing is, these work. So on the nose, on the 4-grain, it's almost like a smoky, not like really smoky, but the first thing it made me think of is like a teriyaki kind of glaze.
There's that orange note for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like a little bit of like Asian kind of spice in there, which I think is this like weird blend with the rye and the oat. And then the wheat funk in there also. But there's like this really great orange peel, like a really nice orange peel aroma on this that I love.
And Paul, what flavor do I like in my rye?
Flintstone vitamins?
No, not in my rye. Mint. Yeah. And this has that sweet mint that I just love. Like, that's one of my favorite things about, if I can get a sweet mint rye, I'm all in. And I get sweet mint on this. And the combination for me between the sweet mint and the orange peel, and then some more of these like earthy notes in this are just really interesting to me. And every time I try it, sometimes the orange peel jumps out. Sometimes there's more of a smoky, like you mentioned, that jumps out. Sometimes I get mint. It's a really nuanced whiskey.
And this is a really good one to give a good old Chicago chew.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like the orange peel and the mint flavors, they really hit like the top of your mouth, like up in your cheeks, around your molars.
Around your molars?
I feel like that those flavors really like stick up on the top of your mouth, and like the earthier, like the darker kind of barrely notes. Maybe that's the oat and the wheat. Those kind of just mellow out and sit in the back of your throat, and because it's really bright up front, and then it finishes like more earthy and dark to me.
Yeah, see, I get a little bit. To me, what lingers is the orange. I get like a little bit of barrel note, and I get the orange that sort of carries over. I would love to try this at cast strength.
Yeah,
I would absolutely love to try it because I want to see out of these flavors jump out. Yeah, which one of these jumps out more? Does it just become super mint? Do we get more of the orange? I don't know, but I will say it plays very, very well at 94 proof. There's nothing wrong with it at all at 94 proof. But if I could get a store pick of this, I would be 100% all in.
Yeah, I think 94. I contend that between 46 and 55%, so anywhere around 50% ABV, is the perfect ABV for most people, for most whiskeys.
Probably for most people, yeah.
Because most people are not going to drink enough high proof stuff to be able to enjoy something that's 65% neat. But they'll be able to appreciate the added weight and flavor of that proof over something that's 40%. Now, that being said, it also depends on the whiskey. I think sweeter, lighter whiskeys can handle proof, especially like sweeter whiskeys do better at higher proofs than drier whiskeys, typically.
Because it's not going to be as harsh.
Yeah, exactly.
The boldness of the proof is going to kind of play off that sweeter.
Yeah, and but I think every whiskey has a different proof that it really sits the best at. But to me, cast strength is always the preferred option, because if you want to water it down, you can.
And these don't taste watered down
No.
at this proof. At 94, I don't think either of the two we've tried at this point taste watered down.
No, and as a Scotch drinker, this is like my 47% ABV is like, that's right where most everything sits. And so to me, this is like perfect.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
see, I drink.
And I enjoy it. I enjoy it when it's higher, but this doesn't feel light at all. you
No,
know, to me.
I typically drink higher proof than this. I think for me, ideal is probably 110. I always question people. You know, I put up things in bourbon sippers before and like, hey, what's your ideal proof? And I feel like people get macho and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
my favorite proof's like 70, like 70 ABV. Like you don't drink anything at 140 proof. Like, don't
Well,
tell me
there's
that.
only like 2 whiskeys that are ever
No.
at 140 proof. It's like Stag and like I think there's like one Elijah Craig barrel proof.
Yeah, and
that
there's
was
some like
70.
light whiskeys out there that are in that range, but and even 60 ABV. Like if you're drinking 120 all the time, like you're just not in the mood sometimes to drink 120 proof. It's those are bottles that I go back to sparingly. You can sit here and drink these without much of a problem. They're very approachable. I just think they're good pours for where they fall.
Yeah. So the one thing I will say about the 4 grain is I think it's I don't want to say odd flavor, but it is a little bit odd.
It's different,
It's
but I think it's a good different. But it
Yeah.
is unique. Like
Yeah,
you're-
it's a good different. It's not, before the lightning cut us off, we had discussed some whiskeys where like they'll just pour sherry in with the whiskey or add port to the whiskey.
Right.
And some of those you get these flavors, like the Alberta Dark Rye was the one I specifically
You
mentioned.
love your Alberta Dark Rye.
Gosh. Like that is a very memorable whiskey to me because it was so bad.
Yeah.
Like, and I rarely feel that way about a whiskey, like that it's just really outstandingly bad. In the same way, I rarely feel like a whiskey is outstandingly good. There's just a lot of stuff that's good to great. Like I really like it, or it's in my wheelhouse of my favorites. But like really exceptional standout doesn't happen that much. But this isn't like off the wall, like crazy out of left field, like bad way. This is in the same wheelhouse. Like I would guess that like some of the flavor profile carries over from the bourbon to this, to the extent of the way it's like blended together in terms of the grains and everything. But it's unique, and it's not something I could drink every single day, but I would love to have people over to try this and pull this out. And
Yeah, and so you and I have had this conversation before, and I think it's the case with most people, is that when you really look back and you think about whiskeys that you remember, you typically remember the really oddball ones. And I mean oddball in a loving sort of way, right? Like the unique ones. And then the ones that are just bad. Like the
Yeah.
really, really colossally
Yeah.
like bad whiskeys. I remember this one because it's so different. And I just don't know that I've had other 4 grain whiskeys, but most of those 4 grain whiskeys have corn in them, and corn is one of the major players in it. So this is just a different whiskey, and this is one that I remember because it stands out from other products I've had.
Yeah. And just like the bourbon, I would definitely feel comfortable recommending this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I feel like, because this is also at the $50 to $60 price point, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would totally feel, I feel like that is the perfect price point where I can comfortably recommend that to most people to buy, even if they haven't necessarily tried it first. Because even if it's not your favorite whiskey, I think you're going to have a really good time sharing it with people.
Oh, absolutely. And give it to somebody blind and
Yeah.
watch them like
Right.
just struggle to try to figure
Right.
out what's in it. 'Cause
Yeah, and-
it's so different that there's no chance they're going to know what it is.
Right. And I don't think this is so off the wall from bourbon or rye in general that you're just going to be super like annoyed that you purchased this bottle. I don't think that's going to happen.
No,
This
I
is-
don't-
This
I don't
isn't
think so.
one of those kind of crazy whiskeys. This is like, look at what they did. This is awesome.
And what I would like to do, and if somebody does this, please let us know. I would love to try the oat whiskey. So they make a 100% oat whiskey. I would love to try their oat whiskey and see what kind of flavor profile it has.
Yeah.
Because I bet that if you tried it next to this 4-grain, you would be able to pick a little bit of it out. But I just haven't had any, I've had, I think, one oat whiskey from High West, and that's it. Yeah. I'm not familiar enough with that flavor profile to know what it's bringing out in this whiskey, but I think it would be really fun to try them side by side.
Yeah, it's too bad they don't tell us the breakdown of the 4 grains.
Yeah, we have the mash bill for, the 51.49 on the bourbon, but they don't give it for the 4-grain.
Yeah, because I feel like it's probably very equal between the grains. Like,
although I could see barley being lower.
Yeah.
But certainly for the ones that are bringing out the vast majority of the flavor, I feel like there's enough rye in there that I'm picking up the rye for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you got the mint on the rye. Yeah. There's a hint of spice, just like a touch of spice. But again, the orange peel, like the glazed, like cooked orange peel comes through, and I don't know if that's the wheat or the oat.
My guess is it's the wheat.
I think, yeah. And then there's like this funk. There's like, and like wheat has a funk. What does oat really taste like?
Maybe oat's funky too. I don't know.
But
yeah,
I dig it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So the official tasting notes on this one are banana on the nose, which I think we both agree that we don't really get a banana on this, especially when you compare it to ones that I typically get banana on, like Yamazaki just smells like a banana. This doesn't have that to me.
Yeah.
And then creamy palate, which I agree with, and then a spicy finish, which I think is also spot on because of the rye in that mash bill.
Yeah.
And speaking of rye, look at that segue. Look, we're getting so good at this. We're like 6 in now that we're even doing segues. Like, who would have thought at this point?
And speaking of rye, just go drink scotch instead because
Paul doesn't like rye.
That's not true. Paul likes rye.
You do not.
Paul is
you can be
pickier.
honest with. You can be honest.
Pickier about rye.
Whatever. I gave you one of the best ryes I've had, and you said you wouldn't pay $70 for it.
That's because you picked it, James.
You said you wouldn't pay $70 for it. You hate rye.
James, why pay $70 for a special, well done rye when I could spend $70 on a bottle of scotch with added coloring that's marketed by a multinational conglomerate?
Yeah.
That's bottled at 80 proof. That's
true. That's true. I stand corrected.
Yeah.
I stand corrected.
There's so much good value that could be had in Scotch whiskey at $70.
At $70.
There actually is. It's just not what I described.
No, not at all. Not at all. So this is their rye. So this is 100% rye, and it's all sourced from the Midwest.
So sorry.
You interrupting my spiel?
Yeah, just a little bit. Well, see, here's the problem. We've now drank these all twice. So now I'm getting a little too much whiskey in my system.
This is where the podcast gets interesting, though.
But I was just appreciating the change in tone of the cork pop as the level of liquid decreases.
Oh, man.
It's just such a satisfying little nuance of every time you pop that cork, it sounds a little bit different.
Oh, gosh.
The shape of the bottle,
we need to get through this podcast.
Right. I'm sorry.
Paul's had too much whiskey. So the rye, the rye. Come on. All right. So the rye whiskey, it's 100% rye. It's all sourced from the Midwest. And again, one of the things I love about this company is they're really transparent with. Like, you can look on their website and know where everything comes from. First of all, we all know the Midwest is by far the best place ever. It's some of the best people in the world were born in the Midwest, right, Paul?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
including who? Including who?
I was not born in the Midwest.
No, me. I was born in the Midwest.
I know.
Come on, I was setting you up there, Paul.
I know, and I wasn't going to give you
Oh, man. All right, so it's all sourced from the Midwest. This one we dropped down. So this is one thing that I'd like to talk to them about. So the other two products were both at 94 proof. This is at 80. And I'd like to see why they made that decision. I think you don't just fall on 94 proof by accident, right?
No.
So they had to select. They thought these tasted better, obviously, at 94. So they thought it tasted better than at 90 and better at 100.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would be curious to see why they decided for 80 on the rye.
So I would say typically rye can handle a lower proof than bourbon can and still have the weight to it because typically rye has a pop of spice that just gives it a punch without having the ABV.
But do you think this is a spicy rye?
No, this isn't like a super spicy rye.
No, I don't think it's. I don't.
But
think
I'm
it is
just
either.
saying, typically, I think rye at equivalent ABV to bourbon will drink as though it's higher ABV. I feel like rye always drinks higher ABV. And actually, if I was going to rank these, I would say the bourbon should be even. I think the 4 grain's great at 47. Actually, it could still be bumped up a bit, but I think the bourbon should sit probably at 55. The 4 grain at 50 and the rye at least at 47, where the others are like, but I think the bourbon could handle a little bit more than the others just because it is the lightest of the 3.
It is, yeah. This one though, I think, so I like the flavor profile of it. It's a sweeter rye. I think there's spice there. There's no question, but it is a little bit on the sweeter end of the profile for a rye. But what bothers me about it the most is the entry. I think it's a little bit light on the entry because of the lower proof.
Yeah.
And this is
not a super spicy rye at all.
No. The way that I always tell things are lower proof to me is that if I take the first sip and it tastes watery, because then after that, once it hits your taste buds, it kind of, you start to get a little bit more of the proof aspect. But on that first entry, if I taste a little bit of water, then I know that it's 80, 90 proof. And
Right.
And when we've done blind stuff before, that's typically how I sort of sort that out. I get a little bit of that on here. But then after that, you can tell that it's a really well done rye. It's rich after that. There's a sweetness to it. There's a little bit of spice at the finish. But I would love to have this cranked up a little bit.
Yeah, so actually I think probably my favorite thing about this rye is that it's not super spicy, even though it's 100% rye, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is wild to me. To me, I get a lot more dill. I get a lot more.
There's definite dill on the nose. Like it's pretty clear to me.
I get a lot more of just the toast, like toasted bread, kind of aroma. Like, but not like super. Somehow that rye, it doesn't taste like rye bread. Like,
No.
It's weird for 100% rye. It's like not that rye forward. Which, I don't even know how that's possible. But
I just don't think it's that. We're used to drinking MGP rye, and that has that very distinct kind of, or just ryes that taste like rye, that smell like rye bread.
Yeah.
To me, this is not. It's not one of those. It's like I said, it's a little bit sweeter. I pick up more like brown sugary maple syrupy notes to it than what I typically would get. And you'll see when we try the cast strength one too, it carries over to those. Like they definitely fall on the sweeter end to me, which makes it very, very approachable, which is maybe why they put it at 80 proof.
I would actually say this is one of my more favorite ryes that I've had.
Do you like it?
As a Scotch drinker.
Do you like it twice as much?
At least twice as much.
At least twice as well as the other ryes.
We need to put that on a shirt.
We
at
do.
At least twice as much.
At least twice as much.
Or at least twice as well.
It was twice as well is what you said. That's why I made fun of you for a little bit.
For using proper grammar.
I just don't know what twice as well means. That's a good idea though. Let's do a shirt for that.
Yeah.
But you like this one is the point.
Yeah, I like this. But even though I typically do drink lower proof stuff, this is too low proof.
It's a little bit.
I'm sorry, Koval, but 80 proof is a little too low.
I will say it's tasty. I like the flavor profile, but if you put this at the 94 with the other, I think it would pop a little bit more.
Now, and this is where it always comes into play that what we're dealing with are not just pure craftsmen in this industry. They're also businesses. Like, so to be financially viable, you have to bottle your product in a way that will sell and balance that with the cost, right? So these are all organic products. So they're already accepting a higher cost, a significantly higher cost of production than they would be if they were just purchasing the same off-the-shelf corn and everything that most everybody else is using from a gigantic producer, So they've already got added costs there. Now they're doing all single barrels. That adds significant cost to the bottling process, the labeling process. You have to start and stop your bottling production. You have to separate those packages. Like, all this logistical stuff adds up in terms of cost, right? And now you have to figure out what market your product is going to hit and what market is going to be the most important for you to actually be able to have a product, right? And if that's cast strength on everything, that's probably not going to keep your business going.
No, yeah. And
right?
I agree. And I would say too that if you are going to make one of your products, like if this is my distillery and I'm going to make one of these products lower proof, I'm probably going to make the rye lower proof.
Right.
Just because I think a lot of people are somewhat intimidated by rye. They find it overly spicy. They find it harsh. And so people will just drink it in cocktails, but they won't drink it neat.
Right.
If you put it at this level, you're not going to find it harsh at all. So I get that.
And that's what I'm saying. So to have it available at the lower proof, although I do think this is a little too low.
Yeah, and we'll compare it to the store pick here, and we'll get a feel for it.
But, with Scotch, like single malt Scotches would not exist if blended Scotch wasn't so popular.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
just straight up, almost all of the single malt distilleries, all the distilleries that are around are still around because for so long, blends were what sold, and they sold most of their product to blends. So, like, even though in the community, those kind of get, like, people shit on blends as, like, oh, it's, not very good, which isn't true. It's just different. But, like, if that wasn't the case, most single malts wouldn't be in business. So, would you, when it's a smaller distillery that's only been around 12 years, you have to start off with products and balance out that quality of what they want to present, because they would probably like to just bottle all their stuff at cast strength, but they don't get as many bottles, so they don't get to distribute as much and get as many fans, and they don't get, there's cost benefit analysis on all of this.
Yeah, and I mean, whenever you go up to cast strength, you're going to alienate a certain group of drinkers, and
versus introducing them at 80 proof, and now you can go get a store pick from Jigs at cast strength if you want it.
Yeah, and I think that's the big point, right? Is that, you know what, if you drink this and you think it's a little bit underproof, then hey, we have this other option for you.